Thank you. Well, I'll just have to, unfortunately, correct the affiliations because Mobile Life is no more. It ended last month, and we are now Stockholm University, not Mobile Life at Stockholm University. So the logo's disappeared, and we're all very sad. I'm sure we'll recover somehow. In this paper, we're looking at how the context of use influences how people use smartwatches. And in particular, in this talk, we'll sort of focus on disruption to conversation. And by now, we've all understood how to be polite, how to not disrupt our social interactions when we're using our mobile phones, right? We know how to extract ourselves to take a phone call or subtly check a message, and we know what we're doing if we're playing music without any headphones on. So we know what that is. Wearables like the smartwatch are slightly different. They take over the place of a long-standing technology, the wristwatch, and so have some sort of cultural norms and expectations to contend with. But they're also newer, less widespread, so less noticed, and perhaps less easy to be made accountable in conversation. So this is what we wanted to look at this year. Now, the data for this paper comes from 12 participants, each recorded for 3 days, with the 2 cameras set up, you can see on the side here. One camera pointing down to catch the watch face, another camera in the camera bag, aiming out to get the context of use. But before they were recorded, they were given the choice of a large or small Apple Watch, and then given 27 days to use it unencumbered by any of our technology. They didn't have to do diary studies or anything, they were just told to use it every day. And this we felt was enough to allow the participants to not only learn how to use the watch itself, but learn how to build it into their social interactions. Then 4 of us looked at a subset of the data and decided coding parameters and categories, and after that, all the video, all 168 hours, was watched. Each watch interaction was clipped out, categorized, and counted by 2 coders with a 10% overlap for corroboration. So then this gave us 1,009 instances of smartwatch use, of which 940 were clear enough for use in this paper. That meant there were 69 clips where one of the aspects that we used for the analysis in this paper were unclear. Maybe the situation was unclear or couldn't see exactly what was used on the watch. And if you're having a bit of deja vu, that's because this is the same data that we based last year's Smartwatch in Vivo paper on. Now, whereas in that paper, we focused on how and why smartwatches were integrated into the routines of people in their everyday lives, this year, as I've said, we're drilling down to look at how the social context actually changes the use of these mobile devices. So we split watch interaction into 2 categories of if the user touches the watch, as in using the touch interface, or if they don't, if they have a hands-free interaction with the watch. And beyond that, in the paper we looked at different ways to break down this use. We looked at the social situation of use, which we'll cover here. But in the paper we also looked at what app was used on the watch, the type of location in which the use took place, and the concurrent activity the user was engaged in alongside their use of the smartwatch. And the third one was this social context. So we split off our use on whether the user was alone completely, if they were with others that they knew, so not counting a crowd, or if they were actively in conversation to see how that changed how they used the watch. And this, we feel, give us a way to look at one of the long-standing concerns that we've seen mentioned in the talks before today, that mobile devices disrupt our face-to-face social interactions, either as a result of notifications or just by being a distraction in themselves. So luckily we've got one of the bigger screens here, so maybe you can read that. But I'll just go through this table and what we drew out from it to begin with. The top row or the top line of each row is the percentage of instances of use in that category and the number of them in brackets. The bottom line of each row is the mean seconds of use for this category with the standard deviation in brackets. So if we look at this, we can start to see some interesting patterns. One here is that 71% of use was done alone. Now, given that all our participants had families, co-workers, friends, that seemed like a hint that they were already modulating their use to avoid using it when in the presence of others. And this was backed up by our repeated measures logistic regression, indicating a significant effect for all three aspects. Another thing we can look at this table is the difference between touch versus hands-free interaction if we look at being alone or being with others, either in conversation or not. And again, we're able to back this up with a post hoc tests with Bonferroni correction showing that the participants use the watch significantly less when they're talking or with others than they do when they're alone, with a p-value of 0.001. And then looking at the lengths of interaction here, we can, when we move from being alone or with others and not engaged in conversation to being actively part of conversation, the mean length of use drops by more than 1.5 seconds. And again, our ANOVA showed that this had a significant effects on all the aspects. So this means that, in general, we're able to show that people are changing their use of the smartwatch based on the social context they find themselves in. And while the statistics allowed us to show that there was something happening there and where to focus our subsequent analysis, because of the video data, which is not playing for some reason, because of the very interesting blank slide we have here, we were able to drill down and look in detail at how this change took place and what it meant. And in this talk, as I said, we'll focus on disruption to conversation. Play. Oh, never mind. And one useful resource we used is the work of Newman, Button, and Cairns. Now, they examined pauses in doctor-patient interactions that were caused by the doctor either looking at paper or computer medical records. And interestingly, they coded their pauses as to whether their topic was retained without restatement or was changed and restated after the pause. So this provides us with a nice definition of disruption to conversation. If the topic has to be restated after the pause or is changed altogether, then we can say that this talk was disrupted. Now, in their examples, they found that as long as the pause was less than 5 seconds, in 90% of the cases, there was no disruption in this way. So this suggests that our everyday conversations are robust enough to weather pauses of up to about 5 seconds. So looking at our data in more detail than there were 146 clips in our collection where the participants were talking while they used the smartwatch. Out of these, only 2 had any change in topic or restatement, and only 32 had any pause whatsoever in the conversation. So we'll look at one of these here. In this example, the wearer is in conversation, and they're just speaking the last line of their turn as they receive notification. Now, they don't pause their speech. They continue saying, if it was just the second time. But when they finish speaking, they continue to look at their watch. Now, this, looking at the notification with the watch screen active, goes on for almost 4 seconds. Before they put their hand down, the watch screen turns off, and then the other person continues the conversation as if nothing had happened. So another couple of interesting things to note about this clip. One being that even though this gets relatively close to the 5-second limit of Newman, Button, and Cairns, there's no real disruption to the conversation. Another thing is that the conversation is not materially changed in any way by the interruption of the smartwatch. As Goodwin notes, at the beginning of turns, speakers generally look at their conversational partner, at the person they're addressing, and that gaze should normally be returned. So as our participant looks at their watch, their conversational partner is waiting for their gaze. And when their attention turns away from their smartwatch, their gaze is met, and the conditions for continuing the conversation carry on, and the conversation continues without any break or pause. No, too fast. It's worth emphasizing here that most of our disruptions were less than 2.5 seconds. And that nearly all of our watch interruptions led to no disruption in talk. But there is one significant difference here. In the case of the doctors and patients, the use of the medical records, be them paper or computer, were demonstrably part of the ongoing activity which was caring for the patient. In situations we have here, in all the varied situations of use of smartwatches, demonstrating that the use of the smartwatch is part of the ongoing social interaction is difficult or impossible depending on what's going on. So while these pauses are shorter and don't result in topic change or restatement, they might still be quite irritating to the participants. And causing this irritation is something our participants learned to manage. I'll read part of this quote. People don't know if people look at their watch for long. I had one situation, it was quite fun. I talked to a colleague about something and it vibrates. I think I got a message or something, and I looked at it and I read it, and she was suddenly asking me, "Oh, are you in a hurry? Do you have to go?" "No, I just got a message. Oops." And as this participant notes, there's visibly looking at the watch is still understood to have a meaning of being short in time or wanting to end the current task, which doesn't actually map to a lot of uses of smartwatches. Also, this is interesting in that there were 5 of our participants who had similar stories, and they told them as how they learned to use the smartwatch correctly and politely with other people around. These were all told as things that happened early on in their first week with the watch that they had fixed by the time we started recording them. So, what should we do with this? Well, in conversation, we saw that our watch use has a mean of about 2.2 seconds. But a lot of this comes from how the watch displays its incoming notifications. Now, the Apple Watch that we use has a stock animation for a notification incoming. First, the icon, first is the haptic feedback. Then, when the screen gets turned on, the icon of the source app of the notification appears, and then that animates back up to the corner, and the data of the meat of the notification is displayed. Now, there are certainly many cases where our participants were able to see the source of the notification and dismiss instantly. But for messaging applications, a lot more waited until the meat of the application was available before they put their hand back down. This suggests that something we could do to make these devices easier to integrate with our conversation and social interaction is just make them a little bit faster in displaying the information that we want when we're in conversation. Another way would be to give people information without using the display. There's been a lot of work on haptics in this community which hasn't really translated over into these wearable devices yet. If we were able to give people adaptive and customizable and contextually responsive haptic alerts, then we may be able to reduce the number of notifications that they have to attend to while they're in contexts where it would be disruptive. The third option we have here would be to use context, be it location, social, or what people are doing, to manage the flow of notifications. In conversation, most notifications are not incredibly time sensitive, so we can imagine a system where the notification would be delayed until a pause or break in speech, or until after the next speaker's turn had finished. This could be used with some learning to customize it to the user's preferences as to what applications or sources of information can break through these filters. So I just want to end on the note that people are skilled both in using their technology and in managing their social interactions with others. And they're actually quite difficult to disrupt, even with all the incoming notifications that new technology throws at them. But we can try at least not to irritate them too much. Thank you.
Hi.
Hi.
So I have two questions. The first one I'm just dying to ask. Did you record any weird stuff with the cameras? And how did you deal with it?
There were more recordings of toilets than we ever wanted to see in our lives. But yeah, we dealt with it by letting our trusty coders suffer through most of it.
Okay. So I want to ask a more serious question, I guess. So last year we presented a paper where we looked at the reasons why people start using their phone. And when they unlock their phone, we popped up a questionnaire. And we found that a third of the time, they unlock their phone to continue what they were doing before. So to me, that tells me that a third of the time, you get interrupted while using the phone. So rather than thinking of a technology interrupting conversation, you can think of it the other way around, that someone interrupts you while you're using your phone. So I want to ask you if you found instances of people using their smartwatch and then being interrupted by their environment.
That's interesting. We've not actually looked at that, and I can't think of an example on the top of my head of the smartwatch use being interrupted. We did, in smartphone study a few years ago, see, especially in the time filler use categories where people were scrolling through Instagram or whatever app, they would just instantly close when they reached the end of the queue. But we didn't see that in the smartwatch. That's interesting to look at.
Thank you.
Hi, Matt Lee, FXPal. Great talk. I'm curious about whether you found whether people kind of excuse themselves when they looked at their watch and say, "Excuse me, I'm looking at this," and they kind of socially negotiating that when they're
yeah. So there was a number of ways we noticed. There was the subtle attempt at doing it without people noticing, but then it is actually quite a big movement to get these devices to appear, and then there was the just verbally accounting for this use. Oh, it's such and such. It's a message from. Oh, it's just a message. People were able to let people know what was going on.
Any idea how common that was, or was that not that common in your data set?
We don't have that number, but it wasn't common enough to pop up to the top of our list.